account of the first epiphany of the wise men from Matthew's 2nd chapter. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who's been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. So ends the reading of God's word. I invite us to pray. Gracious God, this is a rather exotic story of wise men, intellectuals from the east, stars in the sky, unlikely scenes of grandeur in a manger. They are dramatic scenes. Yet we pray that as we consider this story, we would find ourselves within it, find the blessing, find the meaning that you hold for us as we too attempt to draw near to you. We ask this in your holy name. First of all, I want to say that you all should get a medal for being here. A heated medal. We fancy ourselves to be so superior to our animal cousins, but I want to maintain that there's nothing quite like a good old-fashioned cold snap to bring out our latent inclination to hibernate. I think it's probably a rare person who hasn't felt the urge lately to curl up with a good book and a hot drink and a warm sweater and just wait it out. My way of dealing with this frigid winter spell has been to pile on the blankets and crack open Henry David Thoreau's Walden. Soak up his fierce philosophy of self-reliance as he eked out a living in the early 1800s in a 10 by 15 foot cabin. Every so often I'm inclined to eke. I like eking once in a while. To pull away all the extra stuff of life and live on the bare minimum, or at least try. Somehow when I do that, my eking brings me back to what's really essential. And it can remind me of what isn't. I think Henry David Thoreau was an eker after my own heart. Probably resembling an awful lot of legendary Bristolites of the past, at least in one respect. He knew what it was to wake up on a winter morning with snow on his bed. I have to admire people with that kind of intestinal fortitude. And I also want to know what kind of socks they wear. Truly, I think Thoreau took minimalism a little further than I would. He was off the grid before there was a grid. And to be honest with you, I think Thoreau would probably be spinning in his little Unitarian grave if he knew his name was being invoked today in a worship service, an Epiphany service. Those of his ilk were not especially fond of organized religion, or disorganized. But there are two places where I think Thoreau might join us on this Epiphany Sunday. First, I think he respected a good, hard journey into the wilderness. And second, I believe he treasured the pursuit of wisdom, which brings me back to the wise men. These intellectuals from modern-day Iran were, by all accounts, what we would call seekers. Maybe not eekers, but definitely seekers. Seekers after wisdom and understanding. And unlike many, they were not deterred by the cold. Against the odds and against the elements, they insisted on getting up on their camels and heading west in the direction of a tantalizing star. Nowadays, we have people who follow stars too. We call them groupies. Like the Deadheads, or the Finheads, or the other heads who traipse around after bands like the Grateful Dead or Jimmy Buffett. And I suppose you could say that the wise men were also looking for front row seats, but at a very different kind of event. And I doubt they carried Bic lighters. However, unlike a lot of today's groupies, they really didn't know too much about the star that they were following. Just that they simply had to follow it. They were so clueless that they consulted exactly the wrong person as to the location of the mystical event. This birth of a child king. They should have asked anyone but Herod, the Roman puppet ruling Judea, and the last person you want to inform about a wondrous king being born in his neighborhood. But the wise men were foreigners. They were looking for any port in a storm. And maybe there was limits to what the star could do in terms of guidance. Sort of like a GPS that only gets you to the city limits. After that, you're on your own. These three from the east were in some respects flying by the seat of their pants. And their pants weren't necessarily very accurate. But you got to give them credit for trying. Meanwhile, my friend, Henry David Thoreau, is still back in his Massachusetts spot, throwing another log on the fire, trying very hard to keep warm. And maybe a little bit like the wise men, pushing the envelope of austerity, tossing aside social conventions, as he too sought inspiration in the wilderness. The difference to me is that the three magi leaned upon a bright light that was higher and holier than any human philosophy, than any human mind. And when these three finally arrived at their destination, they did something pretty rare these days. They knelt down in a gesture of respect and devotion. First of all, I got to give them a lot of credit for kneeling anywhere after several hundred miles on a camel. Because this was in the days just prior to ibuprofen. So these poor wise men must have ached to high heaven. But beyond the ravages of arthritis and joint pain, the gesture spoke of a deep humility not often seen in people of prominence, then or now. While they were lowering their heads at the bed of the Christ child, Herod was getting ready to lower the boom on the Christ child. So go the fearful ways of those intoxicated with power. No challenge allowed, no threat permitted. So as the baby slept in heavenly peace, the dark clouds of conspiracy were building off in the distance. But here, by the manger, a holy moment held sway. And the three philosophers from the east were unpacking their gifts. I take issue with the wise men. In the popular Christmas song, Do You Hear What I Hear?, the line comes to us, a child shivers in the cold. Let us bring him silver and gold. How ridiculous. Every time I hear that, usually on the radio while I'm driving in the car, I want to say silver and gold, for crying out loud. How about cotton and wool? A little kid freezing in the boondocks, and you bring him precious metals and spices. And right in the middle of all these 50% off white sales in January. Some people just don't know how to shop. But there is, even embedded in that story and their gifts, another kind of wisdom. Pearl of wisdom that I hold to quite dearly, and that is that no matter how misguided my gifts may seem, no matter how insufficient or out of line they may appear to be in the moment, if they are given with deep humility and faith, God will find a use. Just as an aside, permit me this digression. It seems to me we've made gift-giving almost an impossible task, an exercise of mind reading. And someday I half expect that major department stores will set up kiosks with strangely clad people stationed with crystal balls to assist shoppers in discerning the deepest desires of their loved ones. All of this for a very stiff fee. It'll be called psychic shopping. Anyway, I'm back. But apparently the wise men, somewhat geographically inept and politically naive and suffering from retail ignorance, didn't care about all that. They unpacked what they had and they placed it lovingly at the feet of the Holy Child. Maybe the same willingness to trust in a power, a light greater than their own, enabled them to trust that what they offered would be enough. There's an expression I think I've used before. I really love it. Heard it more in recent years, and it is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. In other words, just because something has flaws doesn't mean it's not a great gift. I'm counting on it because I got a lot of flaws. Fortunately, God has been using clay-footed people forever. Felons and freaks and harlots and hoodlums. The only catch being that they surrender themselves and their gifts to God. And the surrender is the key. For Herod, there was no room for God. Herod was God. And two gods make a crowd. He placed himself at the top, and placing yourself at the top carries a risk in many respects. Up on Mount Marcy, which you might say is the top of New York State, it's a heady place to be on a clear day, on a warm day. Not today when it's 30 below up there right now. When the storms do come and they hit the top of Mount Marcy, even Henry David Thoreau wouldn't want to be there. When I was up there and a thunderstorm hit, it brought me to my knees fast, and then it brought me into a dead run, down the nearest path I could find. The wisest ones seem to know that as we lower ourselves, as we elevate God, miracles happen. Our gifts become great, our burdens become lighter, and our hope becomes bright. So in the days to come, I simply wish you all many epiphanies as you draw close to the Holy One, and are blessed.